Good morning. And welcome to the Vashon Island Unitarian Universalists. Oops, thank you. My name is Marilee Runyon. Having a problem. I use she, her pronouns, and I will be your service leader today. If you are visiting, please participate as you feel comfortable. You're invited to stay and introduce yourself in conversation following the service. Our congregation is committed to individual freedom of belief, welcomes diversity, seeks to promote a sense of community, and fosters religion which enriches the spirit. We are a mostly lay-led community, strengthened and enriched by weaving together the volunteer contributions of members and friends. Our community is supported and guided by our minister, Reverend Victoria Poling, who's with us today. As we begin our service, please take a couple of breaths to become fully present. Relax and bring your attention into this moment of communal reflection and sharing. We acknowledge that we are on the traditional homelands of the Swabash Coast Native Salish people, Coast Salish Native people. The Puyallup people have lived on and stewarded these lands since the beginning of time and continue to do so today. We recognize that this land acknowledgement is one small step toward true allyship, and we commit to uplifting the voices, experiences, and histories of the indigenous people of this land and beyond. Whoever you are, whomever you love, however you arrived here, you belong here. I'd like to invite Jerry Gerke to come forward for the chalice lighting reading.
Good morning. Such a lovely morning. I'm going to read The Whisper of Our Souls. Come, let us listen with new ears. Do you hear it? That voice, so familiar, yet still far. Less a longing and more a knowing. A whisper of something inside that seems to have known us longer than we've known it. Come, let us listen together.
I'm Reverend Victoria. I use she, her pronouns. I'm native to the Pacific Northwest, and I identify as white and Hispanic. And I am so glad to be here with you this morning. Our opening words are called The Peace of Autumn by Rabindranath Tagore. Today, the peace of autumn pervades the world. In the radiant noon, silent and motionless, the wide stillness rests like a tired bird, spreading over the deserted fields to all the horizons, its wings of golden green. Today, the thin thread of the river flows without song, leaving no mark on its sandy banks. The many distant villages bask in the sun with eyes closed, an idle and languid slumber. In the stillness, I hear every blade of grass. In every speck of dust, in every part of my own body, in the visible and invisible worlds, and the planets, the sun and the stars, the joyous dance of the atoms through endless time, the myriad murmuring waves of rhythm. Please rise in body or spirit and join me and Kat Eggleston in singing hymn number 83, found in your gray hymnal. Winds be still, storm clouds pass and silence come, peace grace this time with harmony. Fly, bird of hope, and shine, light of love, and in calm let all find tranquility. Bird, fly high, lift our gaze toward distant view, help us to sense life's mystery. Fly high and far and lead us each to see how we move through the winds of eternity. Light shine in, illuminate our inward view, help us to see with clarity. Shine bright and true, so we may join our songs in new sounds that become full symphony. Beautiful, everyone. Thank you. That, I think, is the closest I've ever heard to a UU prayer. We have two short readings today, and we'll hold a brief moment of silence between the two of them. Our first reading is by Howard Thurman, theologian, mystic, and co-founder of a Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples in San Francisco, which is an interracial congregation designed to break through barriers that separated people by race, by creed, color, or national origin. Thurman was also a human rights advocate who served as a caretaker and spiritual advisor for those who protested in the public square, including Jesse Jackson, Marian Wright Edelman, and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. This reading is called Center Down. How good it is to center down, to sit quietly and see oneself pass by. The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashings, with noisy silences, while something deep within hungers and thirsts for the still moment and the resting lull. The questions persist. What are we doing with our lives? What are the motives that order our days? What is the end of our doings? Where are we trying to go? Over and over, the questions beat in upon the waiting moment. As we listen, floating up through all the jangling echoes of our turbulence, there is a sound of another kind, a deeper note which only the stillness of the heart makes clear. It moves directly to the core of our being. Our questions are answered, our spirits refreshed, and we move back into the traffic of our daily round with the peace of the eternal in our step. How good it is to center down. Our second reading is by James Baldwin, a queer essayist, novelist, and playwright whose eloquence and passion on the subject of race in America made him one of the most important voices of the 20th century. This famous quote is from his book, No Name in the Street. If one really wishes to know how justice is administered in a country, one does not question the policemen, the lawyers, the judges, or the protected members of the middle class. One goes to the unprotected, those precisely who need the law's protection most, and listens to their testimony. The words of James Baldwin. Thank you, Kat. Our theme this month is the practice of deep listening. Thank you, Vicki, for our beautiful sign on the wall. And today I'll be speaking on deep listening and on testimony. This is in two parts. We'll start with deep listening. And you might be wondering how deep listening is different from ordinary listening. And how might deep listening to another person's testimony, or not listening, help us embody the liberating, freeing love that is at the center of our Unitarian Universalist faith? Deep listening, as I understand it, is a way of attending to more than the content of what a person is saying. It's more than the words that are being said, and to ask, where is this coming from? What is the context that gives me some clues to what this person means, or what this being is trying to express, and how they got there? So deep listening moves beyond what is obvious in the moment, what is received, and to reach out to find the roots and the webs of interdependence between what is here and now, between us, and what is infinite. Rabindranath Tagore writes, "In the stillness, I hear the joyous dance of the atoms through endless time." This kind of listening, no doubt, takes practice. Have any of you, in your lifetimes of meditation and prayer, or as Mary Oliver says, simply paying close attention, have you ever heard the joyous dance of the atoms through endless time? Or something like that? I see some nods. Some of you have dropped into some deep space. Maybe you wouldn't describe it in that way. We all have our different images and ways of understanding that deep stillness. In my experience so far, slowing down to become still like that is a lifelong practice. For me, it's a daily short practice and a weekly longer practice of breathing and contemplation and physical repetitive activity. Some days it's just a little movement, a little walk. And this allows me to get into that witnessing space of watching myself do what I'm doing and watching myself listen to people. Do you ever have those moments of clarity where you can notice yourself interacting and making deliberate choices about what you say and do? Yeah, some of you I see here have practiced this. And when we have those moments, they can help us feel the presence of the depths and the vastness within which we are held with love, like we sing every Sunday. Like the roots below the earth, holding the tree fast to this spinning planet moving through space. And to remember that each one of us is held and beloved just like that. The practice of deep listening is a way of learning to be able to appeal to our better selves in hard times, in anxious times. And as we approach the presidential election next month, many folks are anxious. Some of you are feeling anxious. Many people are preparing for their worst expectations, no matter how they are voting. And the stakes feel high. On the news, we hear the testimonies of Palestinian Americans feeling unprotected, people of childbearing age feeling unprotected, people who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color feeling unprotected, white, liberal, middle-class people feeling that their values are unprotected, people who are barely getting by on what should be decent wages feeling unprotected. In anxious times, when feeling unprotected, let us remember that the first thing to do is, as Howard Thurman urges us, to center down. Center down before responding. Center down in order to respond. Center down in order to commit to respond. This is how I did this. A little story. A couple of weekends ago, I took my Sunday off to prepare for this month to center down before this headlong rush to November 5, to listen to what is below the surface of people things and political interests. In response to Howard Thurman, I went with my partner to the Dosey Wallops River to sit quietly and see myself pass by, to find a stillness of heart in that core of my being. Noticing the maple leaves turning yellow and brown, I rested like a tired bird, taking in the autumn, listening to the flow of the river water, waiting for the noise to settle. And sitting on that riverbank, I found myself letting go of my own thoughts and becoming absorbed instead in watching the salmon run. Can you imagine it? If you close your eyes for a moment, can you marinate in the fishy smell hovering over the river? Take in the scene of those spawned out salmon carcasses swaying gently in the gravel at the water's edge. Watch the swimming bodies darting forward, splashing about to hold station, sometimes losing ground and circling around and returning. And if you look closely to the salmon, contemplatively, paying attention, you'll notice that as they swim, they support each other, catching a salmon that's falling back. Sometimes they goose each other forward with a burst of speed and encouragement. Because the salmon are a community, they move one another forward on their way to lay their eggs and give up their lives and begin the cycle of life anew. And they're not the only community there at the river. The seagulls are there as well, waiting to feed on those delicious salmon bodies, leaving the bones and the fins to disintegrate and add their nutrients to the water, to the riverbed, and to the baby salmon. Nothing goes to waste in this cycle. So let this be a reminder to us from deep time, from salmon time. By listening to the salmon's life cycle, let us remember what respect for the interdependent web of life looks like, where all beings are important, nothing is wasted, and that we all return to this great cycle of life. Let us center down into the tranquility and the calm of the reminder that new life comes from death, from the end of the previous cycle. And in this moment, anticipating the end of a 4-year political cycle, let us remember that we have the capacity to respond to Howard Thurman's questions, the ones that persist and beat upon the moment, such as, what are we doing with our lives? What is the end of our doings? Where are we trying to go? Out of our deep listening together as a community, we have the capacity to respond. Like the salmon, we can generate and nourish new life from endings, no matter whether they look like ruins. The nutrients are there. No matter what happens, no matter who is elected, whether or not there is a peaceful transition of power, there is in us, in Unitarian Universalism, in our Vashon Island UU congregation, a voice of conscience and a mission to create sanctuary, to listen deeply to one another, even when and perhaps especially when we disagree, and to actively live our values and principles. Our mission calls us particularly to engage in loving and liberating relationships. And our mission will continue. Fly, bird of hope. Our mission will continue after the election. Our mission calls us to engage in loving and liberating relationships, which means that we get to practice the art of being citizens right here with each other. As Mr. Rogers famously affirmed, listening is where love begins. In Unitarian Universalism, we listen to many sources for making meaning of what happens in our complex lives. Yet one of the primary sources that we tend to listen to, and that's true here at VIUU as well, is each other's stories and to people's testimonies from their lived experience. In evaluating truth claims, we look to these testimonies of experience because our individual backgrounds, our individual perspectives are limited, and we need other perspectives to get a fuller picture, to illuminate that distant view. James Baldwin reminds us that to really understand what is just in the United States, we need to see the world through the lenses of more than our own eyes, through the ways that we and others are treated based on our demographic and how we're seen by others, whether we're identifiable by people as someone who holds power and influence, whether we're identifiable by others as someone who might be vulnerable and needs to be protected and doesn't have much influence. When we listen deeply to another person's testimony, we extend them our own power. We extend them our own power for a moment. The reason this is a form of love in action is that we open ourselves to being influenced when we extend them our power. We open ourselves to being changed. We open ourselves to hearing the voice of our values as we listen. I know you have that voice come up as you listen to people, especially when you disagree. And we open ourselves up to taking ethical action on what we hear, because listening is where love begins. Listening to the testimony of the unprotected. However, there are limits to listening to one another's testimony. As Baldwin has also written, we can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and my right to exist. And once a disagreement denies someone's humanity, it is harmful to keep listening. And it is completely acceptable, necessary even, to interrupt and to stop the harm, or walk away, tune out, or otherwise protect yourself. When someone's humanity is being denied, it is important to find and create sanctuary spaces. I say this to you to offer some necessary protection. I say this to you to offer some language for living your values of love and justice. There are limits to listening. One UU's take on this is by Jordan Nelson Long from a piece called On Listening to the Other Side. Friends, if your take on listening to the other side means giving time, resources, and floor space to xenophobia, misogyny, racism, and hate, I won't be. And that's not because of my politics, it's because of my religion. Hashtag UU faith is not neutral. It may sometimes be uncomfortable when we gather, and that's because what we center ourselves around is not anything that happens to be convenient, nor empty space, nor ethical relativism. As a liberal faith, we do not center ourselves around ethical relativism. We center ourselves around principles and around a heritage. Those have always endeavored to call us into something more fully in keeping with God by any name I know, and into what is also more beautifully human. I'm here to point to that and to be pointed to it as long as I have breath. It's hard work, and we certainly do it together, but the primary benchmark is neither comfort for all, nor equivalency and validation of every perspective. UU faith is not values neutral. If someone is denying your humanity, it is harmful to keep listening. Sometimes UU spaces as well may become unsafe for those of us with marginalized identities. I know, that's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes some of us may need to take space and speak up and interrupt a well-intentioned comment that is actually quite painful. And sometimes our UU spaces are not actually unsafe, they may just feel uncomfortable, especially for those of us who hold privileged identities. As Long notes, the benchmark of our community is neither comfort for all, nor equivalency and validation of every perspective. This is important to remember in the run-up to the election, because I know some of you here may be feeling discomfort more from the pain of separation from those who vote differently from you than from anything else. Because this pain has separated many families and friends and impacted relationships. Perhaps you have family members and friends close to you who hold different values, and every 4 years it becomes hard to talk to them. The pain of political separation from one another is a form of spiritual pain. And this is where we come to help one another, to heal that spiritual pain. Perhaps you have needed to distance yourself from someone and are wondering how to reconnect in a way that honors your dignity and your humanity, in ways that honor their dignity and their humanity. If you feel centered down, if you feel able to be in your dignity and humanity, you might consider in this month reaching out with a simple, "I've been thinking about you, and I miss you." And if you feel even bolder, you might try saying, "I'm really seeking to understand, and I'm curious if you could tell me more of your reasons why you are voting for," fill in the blank. This time of high anxiety could just be the right time for an expression of courtesy, curiosity, and care if you are centered down. Many of us are in situations where there's too much going on. We're too fragmented. You don't need to do this in this time if this is not for you. I'd like to share a few practices with you that have sustained me through many difficult elections, where each one has felt like the stakes are higher than the last. And I share them with you to encourage you to consider what you will do this month and next to take care of yourself and those you love. And number one is to gather with people I care about, who share my values, even though we don't always agree, and who have different life experiences and perspectives. Number two is to express my lament as well as my hopes to a group of listeners who will listen without fixing or contradicting or rescuing. And number three is to take practical action at a local level in my family, neighborhood, community, and town. Because having something practical to do for the people and places I love, for me, is the surest antidote that I know to apathy, hopelessness, and despair. Having something practical to do for the people and places I love is the surest antidote I know to apathy, hopelessness, and despair. So for this reason, I will be right here in Lewis Hall, inviting you to come gather with me following the election. So please mark your calendars for Thursday, November 7. You're invited to attend and drop in anytime from 5 to 6:30 p.m. There will be a snack table. You can bring snacks, bring anything. Most importantly, bring yourself, and there will be a chance to light candles and to share, to lament, to celebrate, to laugh, to do what you need to do, and to listen to each other's hopes and concerns. And you'll be invited to write down a few of those practical things that you can do here locally for those you love, for the places you love, and to share them with one another where you can be heard and where you can offer hope to each other. And in that gathering, we may even, for an hour and a half, be able to listen for the movement of life's mystery below the surface, promising that in the ending of one cycle, there is new life and there is the promise of new beginnings. So folks, let's do this together. Blessed be. Amen. Let's hold a moment of silent contemplation as we consider things of worth. Please join me by rising in body or spirit and singing hymn number 1001, Breaths, which is in your teal hymnal. And if you don't know this one well, that is totally fine. There's a place where you can just say whoosh, ah, and whoosh. to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice of the waters. Ah, whoosh, ah, whoosh. Those who have died have never, never left. The dead are not under the earth. They are in the rustling trees. They are in the groaning woods. They are in the crying grass. They are in the mourning rocks. The dead are not under the earth. So listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice of the waters. Ah, whoosh, ah, whoosh. Those who have died have never, never left. The dead have a pact with the living. They are in the woman's breast. They are in the wailing child. They are with us in our homes. They are with us in this crowd. The dead have a pact with the living. So listen more often to things than to beings. Listen more often to things than to beings. 'Tis the ancestors' breath when the fire's voice is heard. 'Tis the ancestors' breath in the voice of the waters. Ah, whoosh, ah, whoosh, ah.
It's wonderful. I'm just still wishing. We will now pause the recording as we We will now resume recording as we finish our service. As members and friends of the Vashon Island Unitarian Universalists, we commit to supporting our congregation. Financial resources help us pay speakers and staff, support our social justice programs, and maintain our building. Please support VIUU with your pledges and offerings so that we can continue to be a vital community. Our congregation engages beyond our walls for peace, social and economic justice, freedom of belief, and protection of our planet and all its inhabitants. Once a month, we contribute the financial offering to a regional, national, or international organization that aligns with our values. This week's offering supports our beloved community. As we receive our offering, please join in singing, "We Give Thanks."
We give thanks for this precious day, for all gathered here and those far away, for the time we
Our closing words are an excerpt from Who We Listen to is Who We Become by Reverend Scott Taylor. Friends, in the quiet of this space, let us not just listen for clarity and guidance, but to become larger. These voices whispering from deep within are not just calling us home, they are home. We don't have conversations, we are our conversations. We must remember who we listen to is who we become. What we listen for determines our path. Jerry, would you please come up and extinguish our chalice?
This is entitled Listen for the Beat of Living Things by Reverend Darcy Lane. Listen for the beat of living things, for time's river, grooving deep by flowing. Rock the world with gentle gratitude for gifts given and received. Pound out the rhythm of community's heart, rushing with the blood of history, throbbing the joy of connection. Sway with the breath of wind, harmonizing sky and leaf. Listen for the beat of holy things, for the shimmer of singing stars, swinging wide in everything. Answer the pulse of your own life as it invites you to dance. Blessed be.